August 10, 2026, a Monday in New York. The US Open main draw is just 14 days away, and the grounds in Flushing Meadows are already coming alive with sponsor setups, production crews, and hospitality tents rising behind Arthur Ashe Stadium. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, it's the middle of the Australian winter. Rod Laver Arena is dark, and the next Australian Open is still 5 months away. Somewhere between those two cities, and between a tournament that hasn't started and another that is already finished, Marriott's Asia-Pacific office releases a short announcement. It doesn't lead with a dollar figure. It doesn't reveal the length of the contract. Instead, it makes one thing clear. Alex Eala is now the face of Marriott Bonvoy's Tennis the World campaign across Asia-Pacific, excluding China. And the timing is what makes the announcement so significant. This happened just 10 days before the US Open, not 10 days after. That detail matters because the sports marketing industry usually works in the opposite direction. Brands often wait for the breakthrough. They watch the Grand Slam, see the trophy lifted, watch the headlines explode, and then open the checkbook. Marriott didn't wait. Marriott moved early. And when a global company of that scale makes an aggressive move around a young player ranked around the top 20, the most interesting question isn't necessarily how much she was paid. It's what Marriott saw before the rest of the market had fully priced it in. That's the real story, not simply the sponsorship, but the timing of the sponsorship. A lot of coverage can frame this as a familiar sports business story. Rising tennis star, major global brand, major endorsement, congratulations. It's an easy narrative, and it fits the algorithm. But it misses what the decision actually tells us about Eala's trajectory over the next 3 years. Not simply the next 3 weeks. The reason the signing date can matter more than the signing amount is simple. Timing is a decision. Timing is a bet. The contract terms, financial details, perks, and promotional obligations can all be negotiated and presented in different ways, but the moment a company chooses to commit is a strategic decision. Marriott made that decision at a very specific point in Eala's rise, and understanding why could reveal more about her real market value than any headline number. For anyone discovering Eala's story late, she is a young professional tennis player from the Philippines who turned professional in 2020 and spent much of her development at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. Until this summer, she was primarily viewed as a talented top 50 player with a devoted following and a growing reputation. Then, over roughly 6 weeks in 2026, several breakthroughs began changing the category she belonged in. At Wimbledon, according to the source narrative, she defeated defending champion Iga Swiatek in the third round in straight sets, 7-6, 6-2, on center court. That result wasn't simply another win. It was the kind of victory that can permanently change how the tennis world views a young player. And it was only the beginning. That's a match the world watched and did not forget. Then, at the DC Open in early August, Eala produced the most disruptive week of her career, defeating Jessica Pegula, Alina Svitolina, and Naomi Osaka on the way to her first WTA singles title, the first WTA Tour singles title won by a Filipino player. On August 4th, the day after the trophy ceremony, the WTA rankings were updated, and Eala stood at world number 20, a career high and, according to the source narrative, the highest ranking ever achieved by a Filipino player on either tour. That was the player Marriott signed 6 days later. Those are the coordinates, and this is where the story gets strange. Paradox 1. If Marriott's goal was simply to capitalize on a US Open breakout, the timing makes little sense. If the objective were to attach the brand to whatever Eala was about to accomplish in Flushing Meadows, you might expect the announcement during or after the tournament, when the highlights were already available and the brand could ride the momentum. Instead, Marriott moved before the US Open. The company signed Eala when her most recent result was a fourth-round loss to Belinda Bencic at the Canadian Open, a defeat that came during a sold-out Toronto night session, where, according to the source narrative, 3,100 tickets were claimed in under 30 minutes after her name was announced for the court. Hold on to that detail because it becomes important later. Marriott moved before the US Open, not after. That was a choice. So what exactly was Marriott seeing? Paradox 2. The campaign Eala is fronting is called Tennis the World. But its key focus isn't the US Open, Wimbledon, or Roland Garros. The campaign is tied closely to the Australian Open, where Marriott Bonvoy was entering its 6th consecutive year as an official hotel partner and where the 2027 edition was scheduled for January 11th through 31. The announcement specifically highlighted Marriott Bonvoy members receiving early access to Australian Open 2027 tickets. So the world number 20 at the peak of her US Open build-up was being signed to promote a tournament taking place on the other side of the planet roughly 5 months later. But that's the second question. Paradox 3. Marriott's campaign wasn't positioned simply as Asia-Pacific. It was Asia-Pacific excluding China. That distinction matters. China is one of the biggest tennis markets in Asia, with a major tournament calendar, significant sponsorship activity, large audiences, and an established WTA presence. Yet Marriott drew a specific regional boundary around Eala's campaign, covering markets across Southeast Asia, South Asia, Oceania, Japan, and Korea while excluding China. Why make that carve-out? That's the third question. Paradox 4 may be the quietest, but perhaps the most revealing. Marriott's announcement did not disclose a dollar figure or the kind of extravagant personal benefits that have circulated online. Claims of figures such as $2 million per year, unlimited first-class flights, luxury airline perks, or even much larger numbers have appeared in Facebook groups, aggregator channels, and copied posts. But according to the source material, those figures do not appear in Marriott's press release, Sports Business Journal coverage, or Marriott's own Tennis the World materials. What Marriott actually disclosed centered on its loyalty program, Australian Open pre-sale access, Marriott Bonvoy moments, and exclusive experiences. In other words, the publicly described deal isn't primarily structured around Alex Eala receiving a list of extravagant perks. It's structured around Marriott Bonvoy using Eala to bring members closer to tennis and the experiences surrounding it. And that creates the fourth question. Why does Marriott want its members near Alex Eala rather than simply putting Alex Eala at the center of a traditional athlete endorsement? Hold on to all 4 paradoxes, because they lead to the same conclusion. The assumption most people have been carrying about this sponsorship may be completely backwards. You have been assuming this whole time that Marriott signed Alex Eala simply because she is a rising tennis player. That's the default way sponsorship stories are usually told. A player becomes famous, a brand shows up, the brand pays the athlete to wear its logo, and the endorsement story moves on. But that framing may miss what is actually happening with this deal. Marriott's decision makes more sense if you view Eala not simply as a tennis player, but as a powerful sports marketing entry point into a region the company sees as strategically important for its loyalty business. Tennis is the delivery mechanism, Eala is the face of the campaign, and the broader product being promoted is Marriott Bonvoy membership across Asia-Pacific. That helps explain why Marriott moved before the US Open, why the campaign is anchored around Melbourne rather than New York, why China is specifically excluded, and why the publicly highlighted benefits focus on Marriott Bonvoy members rather than on Eala herself. In that interpretation, she isn't the primary audience for the deal. The Marriott Bonvoy customer is. Eala is the person Marriott has chosen to speak to that audience. Once you look at it that way, the 4 apparent paradoxes start looking more like a coherent strategy. Most sponsorship coverage reduces athletes to billboards. A deal is announced, a number is quoted, the headlines run for a few days, and everyone moves on. What makes this partnership more interesting is the possibility that Marriott isn't simply using Eala to advertise a product. It is using her to help build a market. And when a company uses an athlete to develop a market rather than simply promote a product, the most important financial question isn't necessarily how much the athlete was paid. It's how valuable the company believes the audience she can reach will become. Proof number 1 is the timing. Look at what happened with the so-called Emma Raducanu template. In September 2021, Raducanu won the US Open as a qualifier in one of the most remarkable breakthroughs in modern tennis. In the weeks that followed, she signed a long list of major sponsorships involving brands such as Tiffany, Dior, Vodafone, British Airways, Porsche, and HSBC. The deals arrived after the Grand Slam, when the value of her exposure had exploded and the market was already reacting to her breakthrough. Coverage of that period has often examined the risks of signing a young athlete at the absolute peak of post-Grand Slam momentum, particularly when rankings and results can fluctuate afterward. The Marriott Eala situation appears to take the opposite approach. Marriott moved before Eala's US Open campaign, when she was ranked around number 20 rather than waiting to see whether she would make another dramatic jump. In other words, the company appears to be betting on the trajectory rather than simply paying for the results after they happen. Sign her before the next major breakthrough, not after. Sign her as a long-term market bet rather than a short-term momentum play. You can't fake that decision because the timing itself reveals the strategy. Proof number 2 is the language Marriott used. The release quotes John Toomey, Marriott's chief commercial officer for Asia-Pacific excluding China. And if you pay attention to sponsorship announcements, one of the most revealing parts is often what the executive says the athlete represents. According to the source material, Toomey described Eala as embodying what Marriott Bonvoy stands for, highlighting qualities such as authenticity and inspiration before emphasizing her connection to the region Marriott serves. Notice what isn't driving the operative language. The emphasis isn't primarily on her ranking, her next Grand Slam, or the number of titles she might win. It's on who she is, what she represents, and her connection to the region. That distinction matters. It suggests Marriott wasn't simply looking for another successful tennis player to put into an advertising campaign. It was looking for an athlete whose identity, story, audience, and regional connection could help the company speak directly to the customers it wants to reach. And that is why the Eala Marriott partnership becomes much more interesting when you stop asking only, how big is the endorsement? And start asking, what market does Marriott believe Alex Eala can help it unlock?